Uh, One of the things I wanted to talk about in the Apology is something Socrates talks about, namely death. And philosophy has always had this curious relationship to death and thinking about your own death. Socrates says in the Apology that why should I fear dying? Because either I'll go to sleep and it'll be like going to sleep, or I'll go to heaven or Hades and I'll talk to the wise people that came before me. In another dialogue, in the Phaedo, which is the death scene of Socrates, he talks about philosophy and describes it this way. He says, the body is a prison, okay, for the soul, obviously. And when I die, I'm released from that prison and I can go to the other world. But then he says this really cool thing. He says, philosophy is nothing other than the practice of dying and being dead. The practice of dying and being dead. What does he mean by that? Well, he means very simply that the whole philosophical project is about moving to this other world, to this metaphysical world. It's about going metataphysica. It's about going beyond the physical to the intelligible, to the forms, right? And really, every time we do that, we begin to separate our soul from our body. That is, the activity of philosophizing is separating the soul from the body and therefore preparing for death. And so death is, in actuality, what we've been preparing for in practice the whole time by philosophizing. And it's interesting, when Socrates is killed, he's given hemlock to drink. And in the dialogue, the word is sometimes used, pharmakon. Pharmakos can mean both a medicine and a poison, and Plato's playing with that meaning here because Socrates' last words in the Phaedo are, he tells his friend Crito, we owe an offering to Asclepius. We owe an offering to Asclepius, and he drinks the poison, and his body becomes paralyzed, and he dies. And why does he say we owe an offering to Asclepius? Well, Asclepius is the god of healing. And so Socrates is saying, as he drinks the poison, it's really a medicine. It's poison to his body, but medicine for his soul, because it separates the soul from the body and lets him transition to the invisible or supersensible world, the world of the forms. Okay, so the philosopher has this really kind of unique idea about death, that death is something to look forward to because it moves us into the other world. The body is a prison anyway. The human condition is one that we are all imprisoned. Our soul is imprisoned, and we're trying to liberate ourselves from this sensible earthly life of attachment, and we're trying to look to this other world. And so death is not something to be feared, but rather something we should think about, a perspective we should have. So in all the religious traditions, including Christianity, there's a kind of healthy attitude toward death and a healthy reflection upon death that they argue, particularly I'm thinking of Buddhism and Christianity, that a healthy reflection upon death can help you live better in this world, can help you live in a more detached way. So monks in I don't know, up until recently, I think, used to greet each other and walk past each other by saying memento mori, which means remember death. Or in Buddhist tradition, you imagine a bird on your shoulder saying, is today the day that you're going to die? Why? Because something about death helps you realize your own finitude, your own finiteness here, the idea that you only have a limited amount of time. And once we recognize that we are what Martin Heidegger calls being toward death, we recognize that we have to do something with our life, that we recognize the burden of existence, and that we have to choose, and that our thoughts and reflections and choices matter, and they're very meaningful because we are only allotted a finite amount of time. Okay, so Socrates in the Apology talks about death and why death isn't something to be feared. And then he talks about later on that in a different dialogue, you don't have to know that dialogue, but the idea that philosophy is practicing for death, or is the art of dying and being dead. Why? Because it separates the soul from the body, and that's exactly what philosophy does in practice. We're continually separating the soul from the body, and therefore continually preparing for death.